Hello, how's it going? Today we're going to be talking about vulnerability management and understanding, and again, having a key aspect of, well, we know at the heart of a effective cybersecurity best practice, we're going to be able to identify, assess, and prioritize different risks that are associated with the organization. Because again, understanding what vulnerability management is the best way to, well, mitigate what we need to mitigate, but also highlight some of the things that we're doing really, really well in. So we start by identifying, well, what is there? What vulnerabilities are actually existing within the network through the use of scanning, pen tests as well too, but overall evaluating and giving a certain score rating based upon that vulnerability, based upon the software, based upon the hardware, based upon the actual misconfiguration of a system. Now, understanding that there are a lot of tools out there that we can be utilizing for vulnerability identification, Nessus being one of the ones, OpenVAS, if you wanted something that's more open source as well too, or Qualls. These are really great tools to identify what are existing. And then if you take it a step further, then you're going to be pen testing, right? You can actually exploit said vulnerability, making sure there's actually vulnerable or not, and not a false positive, right? And understanding that, there's going to be other use cases, because when we look at prioritizing, we have to understand, we have to take a lot into consideration. Is that actual server a production server? Or is it an actual server that's going to have critical sensitive information on it? We have to actually base our risk upon, well, what is it? How critical is it? So not all vulnerabilities need to be addressed at one single point in time. And understanding that, hey, there's going to be a difference between remediation, where we're going to actually eliminate the vulnerability altogether, or mitigate it as an add-on, something like, hey, we need to turn on a certain radio button within our firewall. Right, we're mitigating something. We are adding on SSL or TLS, right? So that's kind of what we're talking about there. And then if you're going into more an advanced perspective of it and we're integrating, think about ways to proactively mark our different exploits to vulnerabilities, like similar to like 0 day. And that's what our threat actors are doing. They're looking for 0 day attacks that we can actually exploit. Now, automation within vulnerability management, we talked about scanning. Well, those tools like Nessus gives you the ability to scan automatically. And then being able to do the same thing, but in the cloud environment, just utilizing those cloud native solutions like AWS and Azure Security Center to do the same thing just in their environment. And then being able to align well with GDPR and HIPAA and ISO, because again, we're following certain standards and regulations that's going to give us the best guiding footprint, really, I would say, to get us to that next step. Now, understanding that, again, we talked about metrics and KPIs, and so I won't go too much in depth on it, but know that if we're doing vulnerability management, let it be data and metrics driven, right? Because that's going to be a better and higher success rate, because we're going off of actual data and trends that we're seeing month after month each time we're scanning, especially if we're under RMF, right, or any other security program that's going to implement that aspect. And then building a holistic vulnerability management program or plan, you want to integrate this into daily operations, because security in itself is not going to be an afterthought anymore. It's going to be baked in. So when you're, let's say for an example, conducting firewall misconfiguration assessments, understanding that, well, as we're going through our firewall, we know that by default firewalls can come in any way, shape, or form, right? So we want to make sure that that firewall isn't giving us unnecessary exposure, right, out on the internet, or at least from inside out. Now, the process that we can go through, we can use Nmap to scan, right, what actual services are existing, what open firewall ports are there, comparing and contrasting to what's actually, well, service or not, being more in line with taking that information, putting it through some form or some way of automation, giving us an actual report on what tools we can utilize, like Nmap and Security Onion and a SIEM, right? Because we're building out what we would like to call a toolkit. So understanding that, yeah, you can go from a misconfiguration and really figuring out how a firewall is supposed to be set up securely. And then going through the process of actually vulnerability management within itself, because again, we're identifying vulnerabilities. We're identifying different things that we need to improve upon. Again, it's been great. Junero here, CEO of Cortex Solutions, and today we just talked about vulnerability management, brought to you by ACSMI. Hope you have a great one.